Well, I think transparency is part of it, but also we have to think about bias that's incorporated into all of this, because, as was mentioned, humans are making these decisions, right? And when we have humans that are making decisions about what data set we're going to add for, say, Marcus Garvey, that's a decision and a narrative that even the students or whomever is making those decisions on what's going to be trained to be, say, Marcus Garvey, we have made a conscious decision as to what that narrative is going to be. So we've infused some bias into that, right? Whether we want to admit it or not, there's bias with regards to why we chose one article over another, if one may happen to have some maybe negative things or maybe something that we don't want to necessarily include in that particular data set, we choose not to incorporate it. That's bias right there. Interestingly enough, because we lack diversity in many of these tech firms, we lack the bias that would then maybe incorporate a bit more diversity in the model or in the output that comes out. It's so funny. Whenever I play with some of these generative AI tools that do images, and you can type in almost any description you want, unless you consciously type in African American or some other sort of ethnic person, you're almost always going to get somebody that's going to be somebody from the majority, right? Or somebody that has a European look, or whatever the case might be. And unless, and interestingly enough, we some student developers and I were working on a project for the African American Museum Association, and we were trying to get the AI to generate slaves that just came off the boat from the transatlantic slave trade, and for some reason it kept giving us these buff-looking males only that looked like they just came out of the gym, as opposed to just coming off of a ship.
The big black buck stereotype.
Exactly, really, with gold chains, okay, as well as.
Are you lying?
I'm not lying. They're here. They're here, seriously. Gold chains, buff, and we said off the this transatlantic slave trade, and then we had to force it to incorporate women, and then it only gave us one or two. So when you think about how these models are trained, we have to look at where the pipeline is, who's doing the training, and then we have to then consider what that output is with regards to the diversity.
After we hear Dr. Frazier, we are going to build on that very specific point. Please go ahead.
I have literally forgot the question. Struck dumb by slaves coming off a boat in gold chains.
They got Mr. T coming up off the slave ship.
So I was like, and then he's like, okay, now you talk. I'm like, what was the question?
Okay, let me go ahead and give us the next layer of it.
I'm just done right now. Go ahead.
So where I come into this conversation, going back 20 years plus.
Oh, no, I know. Now, wait.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's your world.
Okay, this is what I think is really important. Absolutely, there's a pipeline. But we have to be more aggressive about training community people, just training our kids, training Black Studies programs. This is one of those things I have been beating the drum about.
We all have,
because the bottom line is that the tech bros have control. Yep. Right? And if you have to push back or challenge that, we don't have a collective to work with.
That's right.
To do something else, create something else, or even act as an opposition. Yep. And so, as far as I'm concerned, one of the ways to sort of deal with that issue is to collectivize the process and do a lot more community engagement. That was my answer. Okay, now you can go.
That was the perfect follow-up, though, right? Because, so, for me, when it comes to Black folks' relationships with technologies, period, we have to have both a sense of where to critique and where to resist, as well as a sense of where to participate. And so, one, I'm curious about where you both draw your line between, okay, these are grounds on which I feel I can participate, and these are grounds where this too much, right? And so, the reason I ask it that way, I believe that we all would be perfectly justified in fully resisting all of this nonsense on at least 3 sets of grounds. See, look, this us. You got to have 3, right? No, but one, we already talked about how these systems are half-baked, quarter-baked, unbaked, unseasoned, and they try to make the populace do the work. 2, the labor that it takes to even make these systems and tools run and operate requires so much labor that is invisibilized so that we don't see the worst of humanity every single time we put a prompt up. Then there's the issue of the huge corporate power and the way that these companies move with the who gonna check me boo attitude. And so to put a finer point on it, this question of building these collectives where black folk actually get to push back and be creative on our own terms with it, what's the line between places where we should feel like we're willing to provide culturally specific data and inputs toward these systems and where we say, you know what, y'all ain't got our interests in mind in the first place, we should not be contributing to these systems that continue to do harm?
Wow, that's a hard question, because when you think about that line and the optimism that I bring to it, to this whole conversation, that line moves all the time, because I think it's how someone chooses to use these tools that adjusts my line. When I see the line, going across where you're impersonating someone or misrepresenting someone that may not have said something or may not have done something or may not have been somewhere, I think that's crossing the line. When you start to spread misinformation, or even if a student has generated something that is that they believe, and here's where you have to be very clear about your instructions for students. When I tell them to relate this theme to the course in some way, shape, or form, they may have a misconstrued idea of what the theme actually means, and so therefore they might come off thinking that hello, is this off?
Yeah.
Thinking that slavery was a good thing, as we've heard many people say, and that African Americans were better off during slavery times, or whatever that conversation may be. So here's where, by being not only clear, you have to then take what they generate and have them then reconsider whether or not that is actually in the tune or the flavor of what the whole course is all about, or what the whole theme was all about. So you have to be very careful. Now, when I also think about how misinformation is spread, not only with regards to audio and video, but also regarding the output that comes out in any other form, whether it's writing or whether it's some other form of creative output, we always have to be careful with regards to where that line is and how we're willing to accept that which someone gives us based on that which they've created.
You know what? I think that's an excellent question, and I struggle with that question all the time, because as someone who's sort of naturally inclined by virtue of Star Trek, I'm always excited about technology, right? So I get geeked out before I start thinking, oh Lord, what can they do with this? I'm like, wow, right? So one of the things, for example, which is a really basic thing, Whole Foods has now initiated this whole palm thing, where you can use your palm to pay for your groceries, right? And for African Americans, there are clear issues of surveillance.
That's right.
But I ain't gonna lie, I be palming all day. Why? Why am I doing that? Partly because I think surveillance is as such that
it's so far gone, we can't escape it nowhere.
Right, and that, quite frankly, they already have my information every time they use my debit card. So unless I was a hippie and using only cash, then I am in the system, right? Yep. So I think that for me, this has always been a tension, but I always err on, at any point, do I feel like this is causing a harm? And I mean a harm that is not a contestation of copyright or control, but I mean a harm that is mortally detrimental, right? Physically, mentally, spiritually detrimental. That really is my line. And this is where the disinformation on all these other things come in. Now, that doesn't mean that harm has to be defined only in those ways. Harm can be defined by someone taking what you have created and then giving it to the machine. And I go back and forth. My brother and I debate this all the time. He's like, there's schools of art. Are they like the tech companies then? And I'm like, well, no, but there's still individual creativity. And so that back and forth we can have a conversation about.
Right.
We cannot have a conversation when you, particularly with black folks, if you have done harm to black people. Conversation over, the answer is absolutely, here's the line.